Hey everybody, Questwise here, and today we're going to be talking about Fantasy Age. So, Fantasy Age is a role-playing game. It's put out by Green Ronin Publishing, and the designer Chris Primus. I believe I said your name right. I apologize, Chris, if I did mess it up. This is today going to be less of a review and more of a sort of what does Fantasy Age bring to the role playing community as far as flexibility and innovation. Let me give you a little brief overview of Fantasy Ages and then I'll tell you why I'm a big fan of it. First of all, it's a generic fantasy RPG system, meaning that you can use it for any game you can create. You can either port in a world into the using this rule system, or you can create your own as well. And then this sort of just a generic sort of toolbox that you can use. Now the rules themselves, which is called the Age system or the Adventure Gaming Engine, was created for the Dragon Age RPG, which was a hugely popular, hugely successful RPG put out a few years ago by Green Ronin and won a bunch of awards, if I remember right, which was which is, I guess I was going to say amazing, but really not, because Green Ronin always does all the stuff that they put out. It's always been very high quality, very, very well researched and designed stuff. So, no fears on picking this up if you've been kind of sitting on the fence, because it is very well constructed. It is, it's for as far as a hardcover rule book goes. This is $30, and I'll tell you there's everything's in it. So there's a bestiary in here. It's kind of small. It's a generic bestiary, but there's one in here, so you don't have to worry about having to pick up another book at the same time you do this to use this at all. Character levels from 1 to 20. Everything you need in this one book for $30, which is nice. And it does say basic rule book. There is a companion to this coming out, I believe, in September, which will expand upon a bunch of the stuff in here as well too. This game starts off really low in complexity and grows in complexity as your character advances. So creating a character is very simple. You make a few choices. You pick a race, you pick a class. There's only 3 classes to choose from, and then you pick some things listed in their listing, and then they kind of grow from there. So creating a character, very, very simple, but then as your character starts to advance through play, it grows in some complexity, and by complexity I mean that you get far more choices as your character becomes more powerful. The artwork in this is phenomenal. I've not seen a Green Ronin book in the past that hasn't had phenomenal art. As you can see, the cover art is very reminiscent of fantasy. I love that they sort of give you it's not just traditional European fantasy. This woman here has a very sort of Asian Indian sort of motif to her. I like that they've kind of varied that up a little bit. In fact, on the back as well too, you get this gentleman who's very sort of, I get an Egyptian vibe from him, very Asian Chinese sort of vibe here. So I like that it's very multicultural, and it kind of goes to show off the fact that it is a very generic role-playing system and can be used to create a multitude of different fantasy worlds. What makes this thing flexible? What's the flexibility behind Fantasy Age? Well, as I said before, it is a generic setting, so it can be used for any type of sort of fantasy you want to go for. And there's a great game master section in here which kind of goes into some tips and tricks on how to use this for different things like low fantasy, high fantasy, dark fantasy, any of those sort of fantasy genres or tropes that you've done in the past or seen in the past. It gives you kind of some details on how you can use Fantasy Age or the Adventure Gaming Engine to make those work. If you're a Witcher fan, you're going to love this game. I get a lot of vibe of the sort of Witcher vibe from this game. It is fantasy, so in its flexibility, it's great. I've sat down with this and I've gone through a lot of ideas, fantasy ideas of how, what kind of worlds I can port into this, and it seems like they would all fit very well. But I get a very Witcher kind of vibe from it. It's not as flexible as some other generic titles that are out there. As far as like GURPS goes, or Burning Wheel, those tend to be a little bit more flexible. But I believe that this was designed with a basic fantasy beginner sort of role as far as role playing goes. So if this would be a great game to introduce anybody into role playing who's never played before, but still holds on to that, latches onto that fantasy vibe. Where GURPS can be anything, though GURPS, as much as I love GURPS, I'll probably never use it to teach a brand new person how to play role playing games because of the complexities there, and there's far too many options. This, I believe, is meant to balance a very flexible and open sort of fantasy setting, at the same time as keeping it basic enough for to be used as a very great introduction into fantasy role playing. And I think it does that very, very well. I already mentioned the fact that it's getting a companion volume in September, which will expand upon everything that's in here. And I also talked about the Game Master section in here. Great Game Master section in here. It talks about everything on creating campaigns and how to pace them and how to world build. It also talks about porting in those type of things, setting your game in different sort of genres of fantasy. Great Game Master section in this, and I really appreciate that. I'm a fan of looking at different role-playing games just to read the information that they give to the Game Master, because I'm always looking to improve my game as well. I always want to up my game. I always want to be the best sort of Game Master, Dungeon Master, whatever you call it for whatever game it is. I want to be the best at that, because I want to tell a great story, and I want my players to be very, very involved and invested in the game that they've chosen to play. So I really enjoy looking at different games and what advice they give to their game masters. And Green Ronin and Chris Pramas do that very, very well here in Fantasy Age. What innovations does this bring to the role-playing hobby? A couple, and they're very, very awesome. I wish I could, and I haven't really sat down and thought about it. I wish I could port some of these innovations into some other role-playing games, and I might be able to. I just haven't really sat down to think about it very much. The first innovation that the Fantasy Age brings to the role-playing market is Stunt Points. The game uses 3d6 for all its rolls. It uses 3 6-sided dice. It uses 2 of one color and 1 of a different color, and that can be any combination. So, I have 2 white and 2 white and 1 blue. It could be 2 white and a red. It could be any color combination, as long as one of them is a different color. Now, at any time when you're when you're rolling your dice, if you roll doubles on any of the dice, you activate the Stunt Die. Okay? By activating Stunt Die, I mean that whatever is on the face of the Stunt Die when you roll, once you roll doubles in any combination, you get that many stunt points. There are charts inside the book that tell you that when you activate stunt points, it gives you an extra cinematic option to add to the game. So say, for instance, in combat, I attack the troll, okay? And when I attack the troll, I roll doubles and I get 4 stunt points. Now, 4 stunt points let me do a couple of different things. I could use 1 stunt that's worth 4 points, or I could use 4 stunts that are worth 1 point. And those stunts could be anything from I get an attack an extra turn, and I get an extra attack to do that turn. I can push the troll back. I can knock the troll down. I can get an extra maneuver that I can move again during the turn. A variety of different options in there, and some really, really great ones in there too. Gives it a very cinematic feel. So, I get this sense that I'm like involved in the combat, and that I, through some kind of sheer determination of positioning during the battle, I get an extra sort of ability that I can use against the enemy. It sort of reminds me of, oh gosh, I believe it's called momentum in the 2D20 systems, where you're using these momentum points that you've gained throughout the battle to sort of like do an extra amount of whatever, but whether it be damage or extra kind of thing. Here's where Fantasy Age takes that a step further. Not only are there stunt points for combat, and you see this a lot in games, especially D&D, and I love D&D. You've seen my other videos. You know I love D&D. It has a very special place in my heart. D&D is so combat focused that there are basically no other rules for, or very little rules for anything else as far as like exploration, which all fits on like one page of text, interaction of role-playing between characters and NPCs and like other figures, other player characters. Very limited. Fantasy Age, though, as small as it is, and we're talking, 145 pages or so, has packed in the idea that you can use stunt points, and they have separate charts for these in the book. When you generate stunt points, you can use them for things like exploration. You can use them for role-playing. And yes, you can use them for magic rolls. Which leads me into my next innovation, magic. I'm a sucker for magic in fantasy. I love fantasy magic. I love playing wizard characters. I love playing magic users, mages, what have you. I've always been enthralled by the idea of magic and how magic works and where magic comes from. Again, not to bash on D&D and Dungeons and Dragons. I love that game. But when they decided to go with the Vancian magic system, and if you don't know what the Vancian magic system is, it was derived from Jack Vance's Dying Earth, a series of novels in which a magic character would find a magic spell. They would memorize it. They would write it down in their book or whatever, and they would memorize it. Once it was memorized, they could cast that spell one time, and it would erase itself from their memory. In order to use that spell again, you would have to sit down and take time to re-memorize the spell. So every time you used it, it erased itself from your memory completely. While that adds a nice sort of aura to magic, while it adds a nice sort of like stipend to magic, kind of keeps it under wraps in a sense, it becomes very frustrating. As if you've played D&D as long as I have, you tend to get frustrated with the Vancian magic system because it makes low-leveled characters very, very ineffective, and it just doesn't really, to me, capture the aura, the mystery of magic. Fantasy Age has gone and done something interesting. Now, I wouldn't say original. I've seen this in other games using magic points. You see this a lot in Palladium, which is one of my favorite all-time games. You get a level of magic points. Call it what you will. Palladium calls them PPE, potential psychic energy. Magic the Gathering, the card game, calls them mana. So you're using these points to generate magic abilities. Fantasy Age calls them magic points. I would probably call them mana as well too. Where it becomes innovative is in the way that they break up their magic. Magic spells are grouped into what they're called arcanas. These are overarching sort of like groups that certain spells fit into. So for instance, there's the wind arcana. There's the water arcana. There's the thunder arcana. There's a dozen different arcanas with 4 spells within each arcana. When you're creating a character, what happens is you get to choose, as you're creating your magic character, your mage, you get to choose 2 arcanas and then 2 spells within each one of those arcanas. So you get this cool ability of sort of mixing and matching spells, and you can make a really, really cool background for your character that way. whether you want to be sort of opposing magical systems like fire and water, or you want to do some crazy like divination wind kind of combination. There's an unlimited number of combinations. The only limit to this is there's only 4 spells per arcana, and you only get them as you sort of level up and access those things. But because there's 12 different arcanas to choose from, and those are all available to choose from right out of the gate, that's where the innovation comes in. I love using magic points and being able to mix and match my arcana, and not just being like, okay, I get a choice of the first 3 spells on the first level list. Very, very cool. Fantasy Age, Green Ronin, Chris Pramas, head of these guys. Check it out. Definitely worth checking out. Even if you're a longtime gamer like me and has played dozens of different games, definitely worth checking out. Lots of cool innovations in here and some beautiful artwork. And I can't say enough about this. I think it's a really, really great book. I'm really looking forward to getting a group together to put this to the table and really putting it through its paces. Maybe do a sort of mini campaign of 3 to 4, maybe 6 sessions, and seeing how it works out. So, thank you very much for watching us today, and I'm Questwise. We are out.